He thought he was untouchable. A decorated cop, a badge with juice behind it. A man who figured he could waltz into a crowded backhand a nurse in front of witnesses, and bury the whole thing before sunrise. He thought he owned the city lock, stock, and barrel. What he didn't know was that the woman he struck down was holding on to something that would blow his entire career sky high. And there wasn't a single soul in Providence powerful enough to stop it. The emergency room at St. Jude's Memorial always carried that same heavy smell. Bleach mixed with cold metal and the kind of exhaustion that seeps into the walls after enough long nights. It was late November, bitter cold. The kind of night that pushes every desperate soul off the sidewalks and into the flickering waiting room lights. For 32-year-old Chloe Jenkins, a trauma nurse who'd clocked 8 hard years on her feet, it was supposed to be just another grind of a shift. She'd seen gunshot wounds, overdoses, domestic blow-ups, and more than her fair share of officials strutting in like hospital rules were beneath them. But nothing had prepared her for what walked through those doors that night. At 11:42 p.m., the ambulance bay doors blasted open and the wind came howling in right alongside a wall of dark blue uniforms. Front and center was Deputy Chief Arthur Langdon, a name that carried weight all over the city, though not the kind anyone bragged about at church. 6'3", built like a linebacker, with a stare cold enough to freeze the Providence River, Langdon was known as the mayor's personal enforcer, a guy who closed cases fast and left a trail of busted lips and conveniently vanished paperwork behind him. Tonight he was hauling a handcuffed 19-year-old by the collar of a jacket soaked through with blood. The kid, later identified as Leo Harris, was barely holding on to consciousness. His face swollen purple, a deep gash across his forehead leaking blood onto the hospital floor. "I need a patch job now," Langdon barked, his voice slamming over the beeping monitors like a freight train. He bulldozed straight into Trauma Room 3, dragging the half-conscious teenager behind him like a sack of laundry. 2 officers trailed him in, Sergeant Miller, a grizzled veteran, and rookie Tommy Briggs, who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else on earth. Chloe cut them off before they could dump the kid on the table. "Hold up, Deputy Chief," she said, hand raised, voice dead calm, the kind of calm you only get from years of talking down angry men twice your size. "You don't skip triage. What happened to him?" Resisting arrest, Langdon snapped without looking her way, shoving the boy onto the gurney. Took a spill down some concrete stairs. "Slap a bandage on him, hand him an aspirin, sign the clearance form. I need him back at the precinct in 20 minutes. Chloe stepped in close, ignoring his tone completely, and flicked her penlight across the boy's eyes. His pupils were sluggish, uneven. His breathing was shallow, ragged. This was no stairwell tumble, and the bruising along his ribs was too clean, too even, like it came from a police baton, not concrete steps. "He's not going anywhere in 20 minutes, Chloe said flatly, snapping the light off. "His pupils aren't reacting right. This looks like severe head trauma, maybe bleeding on the brain, maybe broken ribs. I need Dr. Caden here and a CT scan ordered right now." Langdon's face went a dangerous shade of red. He crowded into her space, towering over her, breath thick with stale coffee and mint gum masking something sharper underneath. "Listen here, sweetheart," he hissed, low and mean. "This punk shot up a convenience store and tossed the gun in the river. I need him in an interrogation room before some lawyer gets in his ear. So you're gonna patch him up and sign that paper." Chloe didn't blink. She'd handled plenty of hotheads in her time, and a badge didn't buy this man a pass. "The name's Nurse Jenkins, not sweetheart. And my patient is critically unstable. Drag him out of here and he dies in the back of your cruiser. So unless you're looking to add manslaughter to your paperwork, step back and let me do my job." Silence dropped over Trauma Room 3 like a lead blanket. Rookie Tommy Briggs swallowed hard and eased back a step. Even Sergeant Miller, a man who'd seen it all, suddenly found the floor tiles fascinating. Nobody talked to Deputy Chief Langdon like that. Nobody. Langdon leaned in even closer, close enough Chloe could feel the heat coming off his skin. You are making a real serious mistake, Nurse Jenkins. The only mistake here is you blocking my access to an oxygen mask. She shot back, cool and clear, then turned her back on him, walking straight for the wall-mounted oxygen line. That was the exact moment Langdon lost whatever thin grip he had left on his temper. It happened so fast Chloe's brain hadn't caught up before she hit the floor. As she reached for the tubing, a hand clamped down on her shoulder and spun her around hard. Before a single word left her mouth, his palm cracked across her cheekbone with brutal force. The sound of it, skin on bone, echoed off the sterile tile like a gunshot. The blow knocked her clean off her feet, and she slammed backward into a stainless steel supply cart, sending trays, suture kits, and instruments crashing to the floor in a deafening clatter. She hit the linoleum hard, her vision bursting into white sparks, a shrill ring drowning out the panicked shouting erupting around her. For 5 long seconds, the world just stopped. Chloe lay there tasting copper, blood pooling where her own teeth had cut into her cheek. "Hey, back off!" Dr. Samuel Cade came busting through the glass doors, planting himself between the fallen nurse and the furious officer like a human shield. "What in the hell is going on in here?" Langdon didn't look sorry, not even a little. He straightened the cuffs of his uniform jacket, chest still heaving, and pointed a thick finger down at Chloe as she pushed herself up off the floor, one hand pressed to her already swelling face. "Your nurse was obstructing a police investigation. Document get her under control, or I'll arrest her myself for interfering with an officer." "You just assaulted my staff," Cade shouted back, his usual bedside calm shattered into pieces. "Get out. All of you. Get out of this room before I call security." Langdon let out a dark, ugly little laugh. "I am the security in this city, Samuel." He turned to his men. "Watch the prisoner. I got a call to make." And with that, he strolled out into the hallway, leaving behind a heavy, suffocating dread that hung in the air like smoke. Brenda Walsh, a veteran nurse who'd been watching from the corridor, dropped to her knees beside Chloe, hands shaking as she pressed gauze to the blood trickling from her mouth. "Oh my God, Chloe, don't move. Let me look at you." "I'm fine," Chloe rasped, though the left side of her face throbbed with a sickening heat that told a very different story. "Check the patient. Check Leo." What followed over the next 3 hours was a masterclass in institutional cowardice, the kind that makes your stomach turn. Chloe was patched up in a private room, a minor concussion, a badly bruised cheekbone, 3 stitches inside her mouth. But the physical damage was nothing next to the psychological gut punch that came the moment hospital brass walked through her door. David Caldwell, the hospital's chief operating officer, a spineless suit who cared a lot more about tax breaks and police contracts than the people wearing scrubs, slipped into the room at 3 a.m., avoiding her bruised face like eye contact might make it worse. "Chloe," he began, voice dripping with fake sympathy. "This is a terrible situation. Just terrible. But I need you to understand the complexity of what happened tonight." "He hit me, David," Chloe said, ice pack pressed to her cheek, voice steady even as her hands trembled. "There's no complexity. That's battery, plain and simple." Caldwell sighed and started pacing. "Deputy Chief Langdon says you got hysterical, that you tripped and fell into the cart while he was trying to secure a violent suspect. Says you were putting everyone in that room at risk." "That's a flat-out lie," Chloe snapped. "Dr. Cade saw it. Brenda saw it. There were 2 other cops standing right there." "Dr. Cade arrived after you fell," Caldwell corrected, gently, too gently. "And the other officers already filed their reports. They back Langdon's story. They say you tripped." The floor seemed to drop straight out from under her. The cameras, she said. Check the CCTV in Trauma 3. It'll show exactly what he did. Caldwell stopped pacing. He stared down at his shiny Italian shoes like they suddenly had something fascinating to say. That's the other unfortunate piece, Chloe. IT tells me the West Wing cameras, Trauma 3 included, were mid-reboot for scheduled maintenance between 11:30 and midnight. There's no footage. Chloe stared at him, and the full, ugly weight of it settled into her stomach like a stone. This wasn't an accident. This was a cover-up. Quick, coordinated, total. The department and the hospital were burying it together. Langdon was too connected, too well-liked by the people who signed the checks. A scandal like this would tank the mayor's re-election and put the hospital's funding on the chopping block. So instead they were choosing to sacrifice her. We're putting you on paid administrative leave, effective immediately, Caldwell said, pulling an envelope from his suit pocket like it was a peace offering. Take some time. Heal up. Think about your future here at St. Jude's. We value you, Chloe. Don't throw away a great career over a misunderstanding. It wasn't a suggestion, and both of them knew it. It was a threat dressed up in a suit and tie. Stay quiet, or lose everything you've worked for. Chloe walked out of St. Jude's Memorial at 4 a.m., the cold biting into her swollen face, feeling completely gutted. The system she'd poured her whole life into had just slammed the door on her, tossing her out into the dark with a monster who happened to wear a badge. But truth, real truth, has a funny habit of clawing its way back into the light even when somebody's cut the power to every camera in the building. For 3 straight days, Chloe barely left her apartment. The bruise on her cheek bloomed from an angry red into a sick palette of purple and yellow, and every glance in the bathroom mirror reminded her exactly how powerless she'd become. She called 3 different lawyers. All 3 suddenly discovered a conflict of interest the second she said Langdon's name out loud. Meanwhile, the police union had already fired off a statement praising the deputy chief for his heroic restraint during a chaotic, combative confrontation with hospital staff. The local news was running with it, no pushback, no questions asked. Her reputation was being quietly taken apart, piece by piece, and she was completely on her own. Then, on the evening of the 4th day, a torrential storm rolled through Providence, rattling the windows of her second-floor apartment like it was trying to get in. At 8:15 p.m. there came a soft, nervous knock at her door. Chloe froze. Her heart slammed against her bruised ribs. She crept over and peered through the peephole, and standing in the dim hallway light, soaked through and shaking in a plain gray hoodie, was Tommy Briggs, the rookie. Chloe unlatched the deadbolt and cracked the door, chains still on. "What do you want?" she said, voice laced with venom. "Here to lean on me for your boss?" "No," Tommy said fast, glancing over his shoulder down the empty hallway, eyes wide, darting, genuinely scared. "Please, Nurse Jenkins, I need to talk to you. Nobody knows I'm here. If Langdon finds out, he'll bury me, and I'm not being dramatic. Please." Something in the kid's eyes, a raw, suffocating guilt, made her slide the chain free. She stepped back and let him in. Tommy walked into her living room dripping rainwater on the hardwood, pulled his hood back, ran a shaking hand through his wet hair, then looked at her bruised face and flinched like it physically hurt him. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I wanted to stop him, I swear to God I did. But if I'd moved on him in that room, my career's done. Maybe worse. You don't know what Langdon does to people who cross him." "I got a pretty good idea," Chloe said coldly, gesturing at her cheek. "Why are you here, Tommy? To clear your conscience? Save it for a priest." "I'm here because they wiped the hospital cameras," Tommy said, voice dropping to an anxious whisper. "Langdon called Caldwell from the hallway right after he hit you, told him to erase the server. But Langdon forgot one thing. He dug into his damp jeans pocket, hand trembling so bad he nearly dropped what was inside, and held it out. Sitting in his palm was a small black USB flash drive. Department policy says body cams stay rolling during prisoner transport and hospital calls. He explained, breath coming quick and shallow. When Langdon hit you, me and Sergeant Miller both had our Axon cams live. Soon as we got back to the precinct, Langdon made us hand them over. Had the tech wipe the local drives and nuke the cloud backups. Chloe stared at the drive. So what's that? I'm the rookie, Tommy said with a bitter little smile. Langdon figures I'm too green to think for myself. Figures I'm his loyal dog. What he doesn't know is before I handed my camera off, I plugged it into the mobile terminal in my cruiser and ripped the raw file onto this drive. Chloe's breath caught. She reached out, fingers brushing his cold hand, and took it. It felt impossibly heavy for a scrap of plastic, like she was holding the one thing that could take a king down off his throne. It shows him hitting me? She asked, barely above a whisper. It shows everything, Tommy said. Then his face darkened further, the fear in his eyes deepening. But Chloe, it shows something else too. Something a whole lot worse. You need to watch it. Right now. Because once you do, you'll understand exactly why Langdon was so hellbent on getting Leo Harris out of your ER. Chloe didn't waste a second. She flipped open her laptop at the kitchen island, fingers flying across the trackpad as she jammed the drive into the port. A single file appeared. Axon_Briggs_T3_1142 MP4. She hit play. The screen lit up with the wide-angle view from Tommy's chest cam, crystal clear audio and all. It showed the chaos rolling through the ER doors. It showed Chloe standing her ground. And then it showed the brutal, undeniable moment Langdon's hand cracked across her face, the sickening sound of the impact, and her body crumpling to the floor. Tears stung Chloe's eyes watching herself go down, the whole trauma of it rushing back in one nauseating wave. That's it, she breathed. This is all I need to put him away. Keep watching, Tommy urged softly, pointing at the screen. Look at the timestamp. Watch what happens when Langdon steps into the hallway. On screen, Dr. Cade was shouting. Langdon straightened his cuffs and stepped out of Trauma 3, pulling the glass door halfway shut behind him. But Tommy hadn't stayed put by the bed in real life either. The footage showed him drifting a few steps closer to check on his commander, the camera catching Langdon standing in the corridor, unaware the rookie was right behind the glass. Langdon pulled out his cell phone, but before he could dial, Sergeant Miller stepped up beside him. The body cams. Sensitive mic picked up their hushed, urgent whispers slipping through the cracked door. Did you secure the piece? Langdon's voice hissed on the recording. Yeah, boss, Miller answered. Wiped your prints off the Glock. Pressed the kid's fingers to the grip while he was out cold in the cruiser. It's sitting in the evidence locker under his name. Good, Langdon muttered. Panicked Miller. Kid didn't even have a weapon. Thought he was pulling something, put 3 rounds toward his chest. Missed, he ran. I clipped his skull with the baton. If that nurse runs a talk screen and finds out the kid's clean, or if he wakes up and starts talking, we're finished. Need to get him into custody, ship him to county, let him get lost in the system. Chloe paused the video. Dead silence swallowed her apartment. Nothing but rain hammering the glass outside. She looked up slowly from the screen and met Tommy's eyes. This wasn't just an assault case anymore, not by a long shot. Langdon hadn't hit her because he had a hot temper and a badge. He'd hit her because she was standing directly in the middle of a full-blown cover-up. He had beaten an innocent 19-year-old half to death, planted a weapon on him to dress up a botched shooting as self-defense, and was trying to use the hospital as his cleanup crew. Chloe had walked, completely unknowing, straight into the center of a sprawling web of dirty cops. Tommy, she whispered, blood running cold. He framed that boy. He tried to kill him. And you were the only thing standing in his way, Tommy said, voice cracking. Chloe, this isn't a lawsuit anymore. This is FBI territory. This is federal time for the deputy chief and half his command staff. If Langdon finds out you've got this drive, he's not going to just fire you. He's going to make sure you have a real bad night on some dark road. Chloe looked down at that tiny flash drive still plugged into her laptop. A few days ago, she was just a nurse hoping for an apology and her job back. Now she was holding a digital grenade with the pin already pulled. One that could blow apart the entire power structure running this city. The fear was paralyzing, twisting her stomach into knots so tight she could barely breathe. She could toss the drive in the trash. She could pretend Tommy never showed up at her door. She could keep her head down and survive. But then she pictured Leo Harris, cuffed to a hospital bed, framed for a crime he never came close to committing, just waiting to get disappeared by the very men sworn to protect him. And she felt that dull, throbbing ache still radiating from her cheek. The fear slowly burned off, replaced by something else entirely, an unfamiliar, white-hot rage. He thinks he buried the evidence, Chloe said, voice dropping an octave, hardening into pure steel. She snapped her laptop shut, pulled the drive free, and closed her fist tight around it. He thinks he buried me. She looked at Tommy, and every trace of the terror he'd walked in with was gone from her own eyes. Let's see how the deputy chief likes the spotlight. Chloe knew full well that marching into a local precinct, or even the regional FBI field office, with that drive in her pocket was basically signing her own death warrant. Arthur Langdon had spent 20 years building a fortress out of favors, blackmail, and brotherhood. Hand this to the wrong badge and it gets tossed straight into an incinerator, with her name conveniently added to a missing persons list somewhere near the river. She needed the nuclear option. She needed press, and not the local affiliates who lived and died on police-issued press passes and sanitized statements. She needed a wild card. At 2 a.m., Chloe sat at her kitchen counter and fired off one encrypted email to Oliver Reed, an independent investigative journalist who'd been a permanent thorn in the side of the city's political machine for years. Working out of a converted warehouse in the industrial district, Oliver was known for his obsessive, meticulous digging into municipal corruption, the guy who wouldn't quit until every rock had been flipped over. He told stories through a lens, hauling his battered Sony camera and a heavy zoom around the city's shadows to document the ugly truth no press release would ever admit to. Sometimes flying a small, near-silent drone over restricted lots when he needed eyes he couldn't get any other way. Paranoid, sharp as a tack, and exactly the kind of man who'd look a monster like Langdon dead in the eye and hit record without flinching. Chloe's email had no attachments, just a meeting spot and a time. The abandoned diner off Route 44, 6 a.m. I have the St. Jude's ER footage. It's worse than you think. When Chloe pulled into that cracked, weed-choked parking lot the next morning, the sky hung low and gray like a bruise. A beat-up, unmarked sedan was already sitting in back. Oliver Reed leaned against the driver's door smoking a cigarette, camera resting on the passenger seat. No fake sympathy in his eyes when he clocked the yellowing bruise dominating the left side of her face. Just cold, calculating focus. Langdon's handiwork? He asked, voice a gravelly baritone. Direct hit, Chloe said, pulling her coat tight against the wind. He's telling everyone I tripped. They always say you tripped, Oliver said, flicking his cigarette away. Let's see what you've got. They climbed into the back of his sedan, windows fogging fast with their breath, and Chloe booted her laptop and plugged in the drive. She played the file. Oliver didn't say a single word through the assault footage, but his eyes, ringed with the kind of dark circles that come from chronic sleep deprivation, narrowed sharp the second Langdon's palm cracked across her cheek on screen. When the footage shifted to the hallway, when Sergeant Miller confessed to wiping prints off a Glock and pressing an unconscious teenager's fingers to the grip, Oliver actually stopped breathing. He leaned in close, rewound it, and listened to Langdon's frantic confession 3 separate times. Then he reached over and slowly pushed the laptop screen down until it clicked shut. The silence in that car went electric with the weight of what they were holding. "This isn't just a career ender, Chloe," Oliver said finally, dragging a hand down his face. "This is a full-blown criminal conspiracy. Langdon's running a syndicate with a badge pinned to it. I published this on my site. His digital guys torch my servers inside 10 minutes and we're both getting hunted. So what do we do?" Chloe asked, voice trembling just slightly. "I'm not burying this. I won't let that kid take the fall for a shooting he never committed." Oliver stared out the windshield at the empty highway stretching off into the gray. A slow, dangerous grin crept across his face. "We don't publish it," he said. "We broadcast it, uncut, unfiltered, in front of an audience so big and so public that Langdon's whole network can't stuff the genie back in the bottle. And I know exactly where to do it." He pulled up the city's public schedule on his phone and tapped a highlighted event set for Friday afternoon. The annual city council hearing on the police department's budget. The mayor would be there. The district attorney would be there. All 3 local news networks broadcasting it live, gavel to gavel. And the star witness pushing hard for a $20 million funding boost was none other than Deputy Chief Arthur Langdon. "You want to run the video during the budget hearing?" Chloe asked, stunned. "How on earth?" "Police control the switchboard." "Sure," Oliver said, grabbing his camera and checking the memory card. "But the feed runs through a digital subserver in the basement, managed by a third-party civic contractor. A contractor who owes me a very big favor for keeping his name out of an embezzlement story a couple years back." He looked at her hard, dead serious. "But for this to actually land, for the shock to freeze them in place, you have to be in that room. When the video plays, they'll go looking for someone to blame. If you run, you look guilty of doctoring it. You've got to stand there and let the whole city see your bruised face while they listen to him confess to a felony live on the air." Chloe thought about the cold ear floor, about Caldwell's smug envelope, about Leo Harris waking up to a world getting ready to swallow him whole. "I'll be in the front row," she said. Over the next 48 hours, the plan came together piece by piece in the shadows, quiet, careful, no room for a single slip-up. Oliver reached out to a contact deep inside the state attorney general's office, a fierce, no-nonsense prosecutor named Sarah Mitchell, who'd been chasing a corruption case against Langdon for years without ever landing the smoking gun. Oliver handed her an audio-only clip of the hallway confession, just enough to get a contingent of state troopers staged in unmarked vans 3 blocks from City Hall, ready to move the second the word came down. Meanwhile, Chloe braced herself for the most terrifying day of her entire life. She bought a sharp, tailored black suit, the kind that says "take me seriously and don't test me" in the same breath. She skipped the makeup that could have hidden the bruise blooming across her cheek and let it stay right out in the open, an ugly, undeniable piece of evidence all on its own. Friday afternoon rolled in clear and crisp. Blue sky stretched out over Providence like nothing at all was wrong, a sharp contrast to the storm about to break loose inside City Hall. The Grand Council chamber was packed wall to wall, gold leaf molding framing a massive mahogany dais where 12 council members and Mayor Richard Harrison sat looking down over the crowd like judges at a trial nobody realized was actually happening. Television cameras from every major local network sat perched on raised platforms in back, broadcasting live to thousands of homes across the city. Chloe walked into the chamber 15 minutes before the hearing kicked off and slid into a seat in the second row, directly behind the witness table. She sat dead still, hands folded in her lap, doing her best to ignore the curious, sometimes horrified glances aimed at her bruised face from strangers who had no idea what they were about to witness. At exactly 2 o'clock, the heavy oak doors swung open and Deputy Chief Arthur Langdon marched down the center aisle like a conquering hero, dress blues immaculate, chest heavy with commendations he'd never come close to earning honestly. Sergeant Miller and a detail of loyal officers trailed behind him. As Langdon settled into his chair at the witness table, he turned and scanned the room, eyes sweeping the front rows until they landed square on Chloe. For one split second, the armor cracked, his jaw went tight. A flicker of genuine shock flashed across those slate-gray eyes. He hadn't expected her to show her face in public, not after everything Caldwell had promised him. He recovered fast, hardening back into a silent, threatening glare, then turned his back on her and faced the council. Deputy Chief Langdon, Mayor Harrison began, voice booming out through the PA system, "Thank you for being here today. We're reviewing a substantial increase to your department's operational budget. Can you speak to the challenges your officers are facing out on the streets of Providence?" Langdon leaned into the microphone, calm, confident, every inch the hero he'd built himself up to be in the public eye. "Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The men and women of this department face unprecedented danger every single day. Violent crime keeps evolving. Just this week, my officers took down a violent, armed suspect who'd fired on innocent civilians. That kind of situation calls for split-second decisions, real bravery, and total commitment to protecting this city, no matter the cost. We operate with the utmost integrity, often in circumstances the average citizen could never fully understand." 3 floors below the chamber, tucked into a dark, cramped server room, Oliver Reed sat hunched over a glowing monitor, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Up above, Langdon kept talking, riding high on his own performance. And it's that unwavering dedication to protocol and restraint that justifies. Oliver hit enter. His microphone cut dead mid-sentence, screeching with a sharp burst of feedback that made half the council wince and cover their ears. The 4 massive projection screens flanking the dais, which just seconds earlier had been showing budget graphs and pie charts, flickered hard and dropped to black all at once. "Apologies, folks, seems we've got a technical glitch," the mayor muttered, tapping his own microphone like that might fix it. It wasn't a glitch, not even close. The screens roared back to life, filling with the dizzying high-definition view from a police body camera. A timestamp burned in the corner of the frame. Axon_Briggs_T3_1142. The entire chamber went dead silent in an instant. Langdon froze solid, knuckles going white as he gripped the edge of the witness table so hard it looked like he might snap the wood clean in half. He recognized that footage instantly, and every ounce of color drained straight out of his face. Around him, council members leaned forward, squinting at the screens, murmuring to each other in confusion, not yet understanding what they were looking at, but sensing, the way a crowd always senses, that something had gone very, very wrong. Reporters in the back row went quiet mid-sentence, cameras swinging up toward the projection screens instead of the dais. Mayor Harrison kept tapping uselessly at his own microphone, oblivious that the malfunction had nothing to do with wiring and everything to do with a decision made 3 floors down. Sergeant Miller, seated in the second row of officers behind Langdon, went rigid, eyes locked on the screen like a man watching his own execution get scheduled in real time. Chloe sat perfectly still in her seat, spine straight, hands folded, the fading yellow-purple bruise on her cheek catching the light from the screens now glowing bright across the entire chamber. She didn't smile. She didn't move. She just watched, waiting for the world to catch up to what she already knew. The video started rolling, the confrontation in Trauma Room 3 playing out in full, high-definition color for the entire city to see. The audio patched straight into the main PA system, blasting through the cavernous chamber with brutal clarity. Chloe's own voice rang out over the speakers, sharp and steady. "My name is Nurse Jenkins. If you take him out of this hospital right now, he will likely die. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. Langdon shot up out of his chair like he'd been electrocuted. "Shut it down," he roared, pointing frantically toward the AV booth in the back of the room. "Turn that off. That footage is manipulated." But the AV techs sat frozen at their station, completely locked out of their own system, hands hovering uselessly over dead controls. The video kept rolling. The entire chamber watched in horrified, breathless silence as the Deputy Chief of Police lunged forward on screen and struck the nurse with sickening, brutal force, the crack of the blow echoing off the marble walls, followed by the clatter of a medical cart crashing to the floor. Complete pandemonium broke loose in the gallery. Reporters surged forward, cameras flashing in every direction. Council members shot to their feet, shouting over each other in confusion and outrage. Mayor Harrison looked like he was about to be sick right there at the dais. "I order this room cleared," Langdon bellowed, face a mask of pure panic, whipping around to Sergeant Miller. "Get to the control room. Rip the wires out of the wall. Wait, listen." Someone screamed from the gallery, and the room fell into a strange, terrified hush. The video had shifted to the hallway, the volume climbing just enough to catch every single word, every whisper, every breath. "Did you secure the piece?" Langdon's recorded voice hissed through the speakers, and Sergeant Miller, standing frozen dead in the center aisle in real time, felt every drop of blood drain straight out of his face as his own recorded voice answered back. "Yeah, boss. Wiped your prints off the Glock. Pressed the kid's fingers to the grip." The confession played out in full, start to finish, the attempted murder, the planted weapon, the whole conspiracy to make Leo Harris disappear, laid bare for the mayor, the district attorney, the press corps, and an entire city watching live at home. Langdon knew it was over. 20 years of absolute, untouchable power evaporated in the space of about 3 minutes flat. He spun around looking for an exit, looking to run, but the second he moved toward the side doors, they burst wide open. State troopers led by Agent Sarah Mitchell flooded straight into the chamber, blowing right past the local precinct officers and swarming the witness table without a second's hesitation. "Arthur Langdon," Agent Mitchell announced, her voice cutting clean through the roar of the crowd. "You are under arrest for aggravated assault, conspiracy to commit murder, tampering with evidence, and violating the civil rights of Leo Harris." Langdon didn't put up a fight. Whatever fight he had left had already drained clean out of him. He let them wrench his hands behind his back and lock them in heavy steel cuffs, the same kind of cuffs he'd used to drag an innocent kid into a hospital not even a week earlier. As the troopers marched him down the aisle, the sea of reporters parted like water, cameras flashing non-stop. Langdon's eyes found Chloe one last time. She was still sitting there in the second row, spine straight, posture perfect. She didn't gloat. She didn't crack a smile. She just watched him with the cold, unshakable certainty of a woman who had just pulled the pillars of his temple down right on top of his head. The fallout that followed was biblical, plain and simple. By sunset that same day, Sergeant Miller and 3 more officers were sitting in federal custody. The local precinct got taken over by a federal monitor before the sun even came up the next morning. St. Jude's chief operating officer, David Caldwell, was forced into early retirement the second a subpoena went out for his phone records. Records that proved he'd conspired to wipe the hospital's own security footage the night of the assault. Leo Harris woke up 2 days later, heavily bandaged but stable, and the first face he saw wasn't a dirty cop waiting to drag him off to some dark holding cell, but a public defender holding a single piece of paper announcing every charge against him had been dropped, along with a multi-million-dollar civil rights lawsuit filed on his behalf against the city. The mayor's office scrambled into full damage control by morning, issuing statement after statement about zero tolerance and full cooperation with investigators. But nobody in Providence was buying it anymore, not after watching a deputy chief confess to attempted murder on live television in front of the entire city council. The police union, so quick to praise Langdon's heroic restraint just days earlier, quietly deleted their original statement and went dark on the subject entirely. Local news anchors who'd run Langdon's cover story without a second thought spent the following week scrambling to walk it back on air, some more gracefully than others. Sarah Mitchell's office wasted no time building out the wider case, and within a month, 2 more officers connected to Langdon's inner circle were named in a sprawling federal indictment covering years of falsified reports, planted evidence, and buried complaints stretching back further than anyone at St. Jude's or City Hall had ever wanted to admit. Chloe returned to work at St. Jude's the following week, and the entire tone of that hospital had shifted, quiet, careful, like everyone inside those walls knew exactly what had almost gotten buried and exactly who'd refused to let it happen. When she walked through those double doors into the emergency department, the whole staff, nurses, attending physicians, even the hospital security guards, stopped dead in their tracks and broke out into applause. No fanfare, no big speeches, just a room full of people who'd watched the news, who'd seen her sitting in that second row with her bruise on full display, who understood exactly what it cost her to stand there and not blink. Chloe took her station at the triage desk like it was any other shift, the fading yellow bruise still visible on her cheek, ready for the next patient walking through those doors. But something in her had shifted too, something that wasn't going back to the way it used to be. She'd spent 8 years believing the system, imperfect as it was, still worked in the end, that the badge and the white coat both stood for something bigger than the people wearing them. That night in Trauma Room 3 had ripped that belief right out of her, and what replaced it wasn't cynicism, it was something closer to clarity. She'd learned the hard way that power protects itself first and asks questions never, that institutions will choose their own survival over the truth every single time unless somebody forces their hand. And she'd learned something else too, something that mattered a whole lot more, that one person, standing their ground with nothing but a flash drive and a busted cheekbone, could still knock an empire flat on its back if they refused to fold. Brenda Walsh hugged her so tight in the break room that morning she nearly knocked the wind out of her, whispering into her ear that she'd never seen anybody go toe-to-toe with a man like Langdon and come out the other side standing tall. Dr. Cade shook her hand like she'd just saved his own career instead of the other way around, and in a lot of ways she had, because St. Jude's could have gone down right alongside Caldwell if the truth had stayed buried much longer. Down the hall, word had already spread through the whole department about Leo Harris, discharged from a different facility now, recovering slowly under the care of a legal team that had his back for the first time in his entire life. Nobody at St. Jude's had ever met the kid, but everybody who worked that Tuesday night in November carried a piece of what happened to him, and knowing he'd walked out of that hospital system a free man instead of a convicted felon meant something to every single person on that floor. The city itself kept unraveling in the weeks that followed, slow and steady, like pulling a loose thread on a sweater that had looked fine from a distance for way too long. Sarah Mitchell's investigation kept widening, pulling in more names, more incident reports that suddenly didn't add up anymore, more citizens who'd been too scared to come forward before but found their courage now that they'd watched Langdon go down on live television in front of the entire city council. A special oversight commission got formed within the month. Body cameras became mandatory for every single interaction. No exceptions, no discretion left in the hands of officers who'd proven exactly how far they'd go to protect themselves. None of it brought back the years Leo Harris had already lost to fear and suspicion. None of it undid the bruise that had bloomed across Chloe's face or the sleepless nights that followed. But it meant the next nurse standing in a trauma room, the next kid dragged through an ambulance bay in cuffs, might just have a fighting chance the system never gave either of them. There were nights, even after the applause faded and the news cameras moved on to the next scandal, when Chloe would lie awake replaying the sound of that slap echoing off tile, the taste of copper in her mouth, the cold certainty in Caldwell's voice telling her to take the money and stay quiet. Trauma doesn't just vanish because justice eventually showed up late to the party. And Chloe knew that better than anyone who'd ever worked a single shift in that emergency room. But there was a difference now between carrying that fear and letting it run her life, and she found that difference every single time she clocked in. Every time she looked a frightened patient in the eye and told them the truth instead of what was convenient. Colleagues who'd been too nervous to speak up before started finding their voices too, filing complaints that had sat buried in drawers for years, trusting that maybe, finally, somebody upstairs would actually read them instead of shredding them. Reporters who'd once treated the police union's press releases as gospel started asking harder questions, checking stories twice, remembering exactly how close the city had come to burying an innocent kid and destroying the one person brave enough to stop it. Chloe never asked for a medal, never wanted a spotlight, never once described herself as a hero to anyone who asked, not even Tommy Briggs, who stopped by the hospital a few weeks later, still wearing his uniform, still carrying that same nervous energy, just to say thank you for not letting his one shot at doing the right thing go to waste. Leo Harris's recovery stretched out over months, not days, the kind of slow, grinding healing that doesn't make headlines the way an arrest does. The physical wounds closed up first, the concussion faded, the ribs knit back together, but the deeper damage, the kind that comes from being handcuffed and beaten by a man sworn to protect you, took a lot longer to work through. His new legal team made sure the world never forgot his name got cleared, filing motion after motion until every last trace of that bogus charge was scrubbed clean off his record for good. The multi-million-dollar settlement that eventually came through from the city wouldn't undo what happened to him in that ambulance bay. Nothing could, but it gave him a real shot at a future that didn't start with a felony conviction hanging over his head. Word got around that he'd started community college that spring, studying criminal justice of all things determined, he told one local reporter who tracked him down for a follow-up piece, to become the kind of officer who actually deserved the badge. Arthur Langdon's trial dragged on for the better part of a year, prosecutors building an airtight case brick by brick around that body camera footage, around Sergeant Miller's cooperation once he flipped to save his own skin, around a growing pile of witnesses who'd finally found the courage to come forward once they saw the deputy chief actually go down. The jury didn't need long once closing arguments wrapped. Guilty on every single count. Aggravated assault, conspiracy to commit murder, evidence tampering, and multiple violations of Leo Harris's civil rights. The judge handed down a sentence that made front-page news across the entire state. Decades behind bars. No parole hearing anywhere in sight for a very long time. Sergeant Miller, in exchange for his testimony, still walked away with prison time of his own. A stark reminder that following orders never held up as a real defense once federal prosecutors got involved. The mayor who'd once stood beside Langdon at press conferences, praising his commitment to public safety, didn't survive the fallout either, choosing not to run for re-election once his own office's ties to the cover-up started surfacing in the local papers week after week. Oliver Reed's reporting on the whole saga earned him recognition well beyond Providence. National outlets picking up his footage, his story, his name suddenly attached to a wave of similar investigations breaking open in cities that had spent years burying their own version of the same rot. He never stopped being paranoid, never stopped carrying that same battered camera into dark corners most reporters wouldn't touch, but he liked to say the whole thing proved one simple truth he'd believed his entire career. The light always finds a crack eventually. You just have to be patient enough and brave enough to keep the camera rolling until it does. Tommy Briggs left the Providence Police Department a few months after the trial wrapped, unable to shake the weight of everything he'd witnessed that night. The guilt of standing frozen while his commanding officer struck an unarmed woman. The fear that had kept him quiet for days after. He didn't disappear from public life entirely, though, becoming something of a quiet advocate for police accountability reform, speaking at community meetings about what it actually looks like when the badge stops meaning what it's supposed to mean, and what it costs, personally and professionally, to finally do the right thing when everyone around you is choosing silence instead. Providence itself changed in ways big and small over that following year, the kind of changes that don't always make the evening news but ripple through a city all the same. New oversight boards got real teeth for the first time in decades. Hospital administrators across the state started rewriting their own protocols after St. Jude's near disaster made headlines. making sure no future David Caldwell could ever quietly erase a nurse's evidence again without triggering automatic red flags up the chain. Nursing associations across New England used Chloe's story in their own training materials, not as some feel-good anecdote, but as a hard lesson in exactly what it looks like when a healthcare worker stands firm on medical judgment against outside pressure, badge or no badge. Chloe herself gave exactly one television interview in the months following the trial, calm, measured, refusing every invitation after that to turn her ordeal into a media circus. She told the interviewer she didn't consider herself brave, not really, just stubborn, the kind of stubborn that comes from watching too many patients get failed by people who were supposed to protect them and deciding she wasn't going to be the next name on that list. She said Leo Harris deserved the credit as much as anyone. A 19-year-old kid who survived a beating and a frame job and still found it in himself to walk into that college classroom every single week determined to become something better than the man who nearly destroyed him. And she said something else too, something that stuck with a lot of people who watched that interview, that the scariest part of the whole ordeal wasn't the slap, wasn't even the cover-up, it was how close the truth had come to disappearing entirely. How easily one dropped flash drive, one nervous rookie who stayed quiet instead of knocking on her door, could have buried the whole thing forever. Leo Harris rotting in a cell for a crime he never committed, and Arthur Langdon standing at that same podium a year later, asking for an even bigger budget. The untouchable cop struck the nurse without a second thought, certain the badge on his chest would erase the whole thing before sunrise, certain a hospital corridor was just another dark corner where power could do whatever it wanted and walk away clean. He'd spent 20 years learning that lesson, watching complaints disappear into drawers, watching witnesses suddenly change their stories, watching a city look the other way every single time he crossed a line most people wouldn't dare come near. He figured Chloe Jenkins would be no different, just one more name added to a long list of people who learned the hard way not to get in his line of fire. But he'd made one critical miscalculation that night, the same one men like him always seem to make right before the whole thing comes crashing down. He underestimated exactly who he was dealing with. He didn't count on a rookie cop with a conscience heavy enough to risk his entire career over one small flash drive. He didn't count on a journalist paranoid enough and stubborn enough to hack a city hall server rather than let a story die quiet. And he sure didn't count on a nurse who'd rather stand in the front row of her own worst nightmare, bruised face on full display for the entire city to see, than let an innocent kid rot behind bars for a crime that never happened. It was the nurse who delivered the final, fatal blow, not with her fists, not with a lawsuit buried in some backlogged court docket, but with the simple, unstoppable weight of the truth played out loud in front of the exact people who thought they controlled the narrative. That's the thing about power that thinks it's untouchable. It only stays that way as long as nobody's brave enough to press record and let the whole world watch. Chloe Jenkins never asked to become a symbol. She never wanted her name attached to hashtags or headlines or late-night segments dissecting police corruption in cities most viewers had never heard of before that Friday afternoon. She just wanted to do her job, patch up the people who walked through her doors, and go home at the end of her shift without some man twice her size deciding her voice didn't matter. What she got instead was a reminder, one this whole city needed whether it wanted it or not, that even the most fortified, most connected, most seemingly bulletproof men in positions of power can be brought down by one person who simply refuses to look away. So the next time somebody with a badge, a title, or a corner office tells you to keep quiet, tells you your version of events doesn't matter, tells you to just sign the paper and move along, remember Chloe Jenkins sitting in that second row, bruise on full display, waiting for the truth to catch up to everybody else in the room. Remember that the cameras you think are turned off aren't always as dead as somebody wants you to believe. And remember that justice, real justice, doesn't always come wrapped in a courtroom verdict on the first try. Sometimes it comes from a rookie's shaking hands, a journalist's stubborn refusal to quit, and one nurse who decided enough was finally enough. Did this true-to-life story of a fearless nurse taking down a corrupt system leave you sitting on the edge of your seat? Because stories like this one aren't as rare as we'd all like to believe, And the truth always finds a way into the light eventually. But it needs brave voices willing to carry it there. People willing to risk everything just to make sure the record stays straight. If you were rooting for Chloe every step of the way, if watching Langdon get walked out in cuffs gave you even a little bit of that gut punch satisfaction, do us a solid and hit that like button before you scroll away. Share this video with your friends, your family, anybody who needs a reminder that standing your ground actually matters, that one person really can make all the difference when it counts the most. And if you want more true-to-life dramas just like this one, stories that'll keep you glued to the screen from the very first second, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you never miss the next one when it drops. We've got plenty more stories exactly like Chloe's waiting in the pipeline. Real accounts of everyday people who found the courage to stand up when it would have been so much easier to just walk away and stay quiet. Before you head out, drop a comment down below and let us know exactly what you would have done in Chloe's shoes that night. Would you have signed the clearance form and let it go? Or would you have stood your ground in that trauma room no matter what it cost you? We read every single comment, and we always love hearing how this community would have handled the exact same impossible situation. Thanks so much for watching all the way to the end. We genuinely appreciate every single one of you who sticks around for these stories, and we'll see you in the next video with another true account that proves the good guys don't always wear a badge. Sometimes they wear scrubs, carry a camera, or simply have the courage to knock on the right door at exactly the right moment. Until then, take care of each other, keep asking the hard questions, and never underestimate what one determined person can do when they finally decide they've had enough of staying silent. Somewhere out there tonight, another Chloe Jenkins is standing in a hallway she never asked to be part of, deciding whether to speak up or look away, and stories like hers are exactly why that choice still matters and exactly why we keep telling them one brave voice at a time.